Welcome everyone, Costin here with my Dragon Age the Veilguard companion tier list from the best to the worst. Though it is worth saying from the onset of this particular video that from a gameplay perspective at the very least, all companions are quite very viable. This is not a situation you see in any other Bioware game. As someone who's played Bioware games for 20 years and RPGs for just as much time, I can tell you one thing for a fact, that in a lot of games, in a lot of RPGs, you have situations from a gameplay standpoint where you might like a companion from a story perspective, but they aren't particularly useful in gameplay, in particular with your playstyle or just because of the way the difficulty is designed. And that has certainly been the case in Dragon Age. It's also been the case in Mass Effect, like Jacob was flat useless in Mass Effect 2, as an example. Probably the ultimate example to be sure, but there are absolutely squad members, team members, companions in Bioware games that, might be interesting from a story perspective, but aren't so great from a combat perspective, especially if you're playing on a higher difficulty. And I am considering Nightmare difficulty for the purposes of this video. Or you have companions or party members that are good from a combat perspective, but they are not so interesting from a story perspective. To be sure, that does apply to some extent over here in this game, but in the gameplay aspect at least. But one of the things I really like about Veilguard is that you do have a lot of flexibility with your party in a way that other games don't. Like, you can min-max a party in so many different ways, with so many different companions. The one thing that actually matters more so than anything else is not like necessarily the party members themselves, it's what your build is, what your items are, what kind of damage you're doing, what kind of abilities you're using. But there are a lot of things that do work, a lot of things that are just as viable as each other. There are certainly some things that I feel work better than others, but it isn't the discrepancy that I saw before. Like, for instance, in Dragon Age Origins, Wynn was the best companion by far because she had a lot of healing, and her special skill line as a healer mage was extraordinarily powerful, which meant she was the go-to companion you wanted in that game. Sure, you could beat the game without her, but just the point. Other companions, nowhere near as good with respect to that. Or you would need a rogue, but between Zevran and Leliana, let's just say Zevran was an absolute slaughter machine with his daggers compared to Leliana. Not talking about the value of them as characters. I actually like both Zevran and Leliana. In fact, I don't really dislike any companion in Dragon Age Origins, but think of this. You have a dog as a party member there, and he's genuinely the most useless companion, and it's like, it's a dog. Who doesn't like having a dog and having that in their party? But it is certainly going to affect you significantly in the gameplay, from a gameplay standpoint. So that is something worth keeping in mind. Now, with regards to this tier list, I'm going to consider the following aspects. How good are they in combat? How easy it is to get good items for them to... And all companions have roughly the same number of items, but how easy it is to get those kind of items, like be a reputation or areas or exploration. That does matter. How good is their dialogue, for instance? Not talking about the voice acting or character design necessarily, but how good is their actual dialogue, the interactions you have with them? How good is their storyline? Is it an interesting storyline? Is it a compelling storyline? Do you go to interesting areas? Do you go to unique areas in that storyline that I would really like to explore more potentially outside of these companion quests? These things do matter from my perspective. So it's the entire thing put together. You can say some of this is opinion-based. There's obviously going to be a combination of opinions and objective facts over here with respect to it. So more objective with respect to the gameplay aspect. Numbers don't lie. More subjective, if you will, on the story aspect. But even then, there are absolutely objective facts. Like, if a companion has specific unique areas in their storyline that you don't go to otherwise, that is a plus. And that can be really interesting if you're dealing with particular party members. So, with that in mind, let's start from the very best, and it would be Davrin. Now, Davrin is a tank. He's not a damage dealer. He can help you out the damage because he does have the ability of detonating weakened, But here's the thing. Out of the 3 detonations, be it Overwhelmed, Weakened, and Staggered, Weakened is the worst one from a damage perspective. At least from my personal experience. I'm sure there are different builds you could use with this. But it is fire damage that he's doing over here with that from above. So fire damage, it can work in many situations, but there's also enemies that are resistant to a degree or another to it. That is a problem. I mean, of course, there's enemies that are resistant to all types of damage. So every school of damage that you have, like there's enemies that are resistant to cold. There are enemies resistant to necrotic. But it is how many enemies you're going to encounter in the world of a particular type that does matter. Because there are more enemies of certain types than others. But if you're looking to use Davrin from a damage dealing perspective or detonation perspective, that is not his role. His role is the perspective of a tank. His Veilguard skill, which you unlock once you complete his companion questline, gives you a cooldown benefit for Hassan's abilities. And also gain deflect. So Death from Above, which detonates Weakened, or you can talk about Heroic Strike. You can talk about the Hassan Strike. Those will be affected by it, but only those. And those are not really the most powerful abilities that Davrin has. The most powerful ability, and because of the way companion leveling works in Dragon Age Veilguard, when you get a companion, you're probably going to want to focus on one skill early on, and then the second skill. Like, for instance, you may not want to focus more and, level up more than 3 skills. Like, it is, like, you can probably get 3 skill lines, like, at level 11, but that takes a very, very long time. So with a companion, having one really good skill is one of the things that makes them stand out. And Davrin has an exceptionally good skill. He has Battlecry. He has a taunt. Now, he's not the only one with the taunt, but his taunt is substantially better than what Taash has, for instance. And the reason is that he gets HP replenishment with just 1 skill point. So when you get Davrin, and you can spend skill points on him, this is what you're going to want to spend it on. So he gives you a constant healing effect because you can taunt a lot with him. It's fairly short cooldown because you do have a benefit with that cooldown. So for instance, you can get Quick to Anger as opposed to Echo. And I would certainly recommend getting Quick to Anger because being able to use taunt faster is very, very useful. But then on top of that, he has a skill that you'll always get that with its own cooldown of every 60 seconds that applies the taunt if you get low HP. So basically, you don't even have to constantly cast this ability with Davrin, though you absolutely can. I personally do. You don't have to constantly cast taunt with Davrin, because when you're low HP, he will do so automatically. This will save your life. Combine that with the HP regeneration, combine that with the duration that you can increase on that, and combine that with the extra damage effect that you gain when you taunt enemies with Davrin. You can also apply either physical damage effect or a fire effect. I personally went with fire, but that's, what do you think is more useful? The important thing is you're increasing your damage, you're healing up, and the enemies are not going after you. I played a mage. If you're playing a warrior, or you're very fast on your feet and you can do a lot of damage while still moving, the main damage capability is going to come from Rook, at least with auto attacks. So you just having that breathing room to hit enemies without having to worry about being hit, and also being healed without having to use a healing potions or a heal effect from a companion that would put a cooldown, is exceptionally freaking useful. So that is from the perspective of just pure combat. Item-wise, once you recruit Davrin, it may take you a bit to unlock his items, because you do need to unlock that White Lands, which is gonna be shortly thereafter anyway. But you do find quite a few items over there that you can get for him. So items is not really a problem. He doesn't have the most easy access to items. There's someone that's much better than him. But it is good enough that you do have a good selection of items fairly early on once you do get him. So that is from a combat perspective, from an item perspective. Let's talk story. While I wouldn't say Davrin is necessarily the most interesting character from a story perspective, he's raising a griffin. And that is freaking awesome. like, I'm not sure what kind of person would hate Hassan. Like, of all the issues Dragon Age Veilguard has on a story level, and there are a lot of issues with companions, with characters, with the lore, I'm not exactly certain what kind of person would despise Hassan. So just the whole raise your griffin aspect and Davrin learning to deal with that is awesome. Like, that is great. The one downside I would say with Davrin is not related to his dialogue or his story. He does have pretty decent dialogue. He does have a good voice actor. He's a fairly interesting enough character. He is a Grey Warden, and that's very fitting for this game considering how much of the Blight you're dealing with. The one downside is with the locations where you're doing these quests, because a lot of them are in Arlefin, and Arlefin is dull as dirt in a lot of ways, and you go back there a lot. That is the one downside. The repetitiveness of environments when you are playing, when you're doing Davrin's quest. There are other quests that are taking place in the wetlands, but even then, typically speaking, you're going to be going in areas that are just exploration areas, that some of them might be locked off until you do his companion's quest, which, by the way, is really freaking annoying. But there's less uniqueness in terms of unique areas in companion quests. So that is one major downside, but it comes nowhere close to overcoming how freaking awesome that Davrin is from both the Griffin aspect of his storyline and the amazing parts of that. Like, I like Hassan. Let's just put it like that. And also, like, just his sheer usefulness in combat. Davrin works with so many other party members. Sure, you might want to go with a party member that, has weakened or someone that synergizes well with Rook. But just the fact that he's keeping you alive is an exceptional capability. So all of that works very, very well. You may not necessarily want to get him as much if you're playing a warrior, but if you're playing a rogue, if you're playing a mage, you will certainly want him quite a lot. I took this guy to the final boss, and I took this guy to many of the most difficult bosses in the game. I could have done those bosses quite well with other companions, but I just felt very comfortable, if you will, using Davrin. He just removes a lot of stress that you might feel in combat. Again, lots of things are very viable, and many playstyles do work. You are sacrificing damage to go with Davrin, but in terms of survivability, he really helps you out in a significant way. So, Davrin, number 1 on this list. Number 2, and I'm sure this might surprise a lot of people, but number 2 is Harding. Harding starts with you from the beginning of the game. So that's a bonus. You have her for the longest period of time in the game. She's got some of the worst dialogue in the game. I think I agree with a lot of people on Reddit and other places that are saying Harding is just boring to talk to. She's not interesting at all to have conversation with. So that is a downside. However, while that is a downside, and getting a weapon for her may be a bit more tricky than you might think. Like, I certainly took my time with getting good weapons for her. Maybe that was just a mistake on my part. It wasn't necessarily that I was lacking weapons. It was like I was lacking the sheer number of them that I could get with other companions. So that is a downside. Some of the items can be a bit annoying to acquire for Harding. But having said that, let's go over the significant benefits. Harding has the best heal from an actual healing perspective in the game. You may not necessarily want to max out. I didn't necessarily feel that, like, by the point I could have maxed it out, I realized I didn't need to. But early on, you have Soothing Potion. And the reason this is so exceptionally useful is the way this works. See, all other heals in the game will be just a direct healing effect, right? Well, Harding has a heal over time effect. And the reason this is useful is for several reasons. One, when you get healed, that's great. But what if you get hit right after you get healed, then you drop to very low HP, and that heal is wasted? That's not going to happen with Harding's heal. You're always going to get a use out of it. Or let's say you heal and you have an effect on you. You've healed some, but the effect's still on you, so you're going to drop HP. Again, heal is kind of wasted. With Harding, you're always getting benefits from her healing. Her Veilguard skill, and I don't necessarily know if the Veilguard skill is changed dependent on the choice you make for a companion. And I say that because it could be different. Because you do have, with every companion, a major choice at the end of their storyline that can change them. It changes their armor, the legendary armor that you do get. I'm not sure if it changes the Veilguard skill. But the one I got, Soothing Potion, cooldown duration by minus 15%, and her detonation damage is increased by 25%, and you and other companion gain 20% damage and 15% cooldown reduction. That's pretty powerful. But that's the end of this quest line. But here's the thing. She's a range damage dealer with a bow. That is pretty damn strong, and especially because she can, early on, she can increase that damage as well with Adrenaline Rush. You may not necessarily want to use it, because Harding's real power comes from this. She has heavy draw, and she has shred. She can apply Sundered and detonate Overwhelmed. Now, between Weakened, Overwhelmed, and Sundered, Sundered is the best. And she applies a lot of stagger, does a lot of damage, and she can also do it independently of the shred cooldown. So you can either heal or detonate Overwhelms with her and still get the Sundered effect with Harding. That's pretty strong. And if you're using Attack My Target, like Harding's range capability makes it so that she actually does a lot more damage than other companions, just from a practical standpoint in the game. So she's a really, really good damage dealer. She's great with detonations. She's good with Overwhelm. She's good with Sundered. Either one of those works. Personally, in my playthrough, I went with Shred because I had the ability of detonating Sunders. But if you have the ability of applying Overwhelmed, you may want to go with Heavy Draw. Either one works. She has a great deal of damage capability, a good amount of healing capability, and she's available very early on from the very beginning of the game. Those are strong points. And before I get to number 3, we kind of talk about her story. One of the because the combat capability, gameplay capability is not why I placed Harding so high. She would certainly be higher than others, but she wouldn't be in second place on just this alone. The reason she's in second place is because she has the best quest lines in the game by far. From the gameplay standpoint, from an area standpoint, like you go to Kalsharak or in a Kalsharak outpost. You get to meet Kalsharak dwarves. That is freaking interesting. You have unique gameplay areas that are just designed for Harding's quest. That is very interesting. And areas unique on the map. Few companions have that. And certainly no one has as much of this as Harding does. And that is a really strong point. I suppose BioWare is trying to make up for the fact that Harding doesn't have a recruitment quest. I should point out that didn't work out quite, that they didn't do the same thing for Neve. With Bellara, that's a different discussion. They didn't do the same thing for Neve, another companion you get from the start of the game. But with Harding, they really had quite a lot of interesting aspects. The Titan aspect, the history of the dwarves, all of those things are interesting. You will have a better understanding of the world, such as it is, with the lore as it is. You'll have a better understanding of the world. You'll appreciate the story better if you do Harding's companion quests, which is not necessarily something you can apply to every companion. Sure, all companions enrich the story experience to some degree. I'd say Harding does the most out of all companions in the game. Even more so than Davrin. Like, seriously, yes, it's awesome to raise your griffin and go for that, but it's not necessarily... But his entire storyline, you will learn things in Harding's storyline that you can't learn otherwise, elsewhere in the game, for instance. So... And I'm sure a lot of things that are about the dwarves and titans, the things that this game has revealed, will be coming from Harding's questline. So there's a lot of things to like about that. She's just really dull from a personality perspective. Like, if she was actually more interesting in terms of dialogue, she would probably be at the very highest point of the list. But she loses not necessarily to Davrin, but to Hassan. And if you're losing to a cute griffin on this list, I'm not sure you're necessarily in a bad place, really. At number 3, and I was tempted to put him at number 2, but yeah, just Harding's questline are great. And her combat ability is also pretty good. But number 3 is Emmrich. Now, let me explain something about Emmrich. Ignore the companion screen over here. Let's take a look at Emmrich. That is Emmrich. He's a lich. He doesn't start out as that, but it is a choice. Ner'zhul will eat your heart out. Like, the whole necromancy thing is awkward, but I like the fact that the game is just like, oh, there's necromancy, and it's like everyone's fine with it. No, many people aren't fine with it. For bloody good reason. It is an abomination. But they do spend the effort. Now, I don't necessarily like the way Emmrich talks, if you will. He's too cheerful for someone dealing with corpses every day. And not necessarily cheerful in the right way, if you catch my meaning. However, let's consider his combat capability. Emmrich is a support character. If you're looking for him to have great healing, he's not going to have great healing. A support damage healer specifically. His Veilguard skill, again, I don't know if this changes depending on the choice, like you can make him a lich or not, but all of Emmrich's abilities apply necrosis when dealing damage. The Parting's affliction damage is increased by 25%. Again, pretty significant. But here's the thing. Necrotic damage is exceptionally useful against the vast majority of enemies in the game. Like, there's only a handful of enemy types that don't get shredded by a high level of necrotic damage. And you certainly won't be encountering them as much as, say, Darkspawn, for instance, or Venatori. So that is a big plus with Emmrich. He does have the ability of applying Weakened, and he can also do this passively with its own cooldown, separate from that. So you don't even need to use the skill, he will occasionally do it. Or every 1 minute, he will do it. Of course, you can improve cooldown, all that kind of stuff. Or on critical hit, he applies Necrosis. That is pretty good Necrosis over there. So you do have some pretty good damage dealing capability. Or you could focus on detonating with him with Sunders. I admit that I didn't really fully realize Emmrich's potential until pretty much that very end of the game. But I'm going to tell you, this guy, he may not do the most damage himself, but he allows you to do a lot of damage. Because, like, mages have the ability of doing necrotic damage, a lot of it. Warriors can do necrotic damage. Rogues can do necrotic damage. So, the capability that you have with Emmrich buffing that type of damage, which, again, works against a lot of different enemies, except amusingly enough, the kind of enemies that you might encounter in Emmrich's quest lines. Though not all of them, some of them at least. But the fact that you have that kind of damage capability is pretty damn useful to begin with. Then you have the heal itself is not especially great. Yes, invulnerable, all that kind of stuff, sure. And invulnerable duration. Or healing is delayed until after invulnerable ends. But here's the thing about that. While the healing isn't great, and I wouldn't necessarily recommend using it, you do have the Bell Tolls ability. Now, this particular ability, it doesn't detonate, but it does put a pretty nasty debuff on enemies. And that particular capability is useful, especially if you want to put a dot on a target. So, that constant necrotic damage, there was one particular boss which was pretty hard because it was constantly regenerating HP when every second it was a hit. I just used Emmrich to apply necrotic on it and made the fight a lot easier. You also gain mana every second from that. Keep in mind this is as a mage. So there's a good amount of capability here, and crucially, that debuff reduces the target's resistance to necrotic damage by 25%. You can understand what I'm talking about here. Like, you're reducing the enemy's defenses by 25% to a particular damage type that, as a mage, for instance, you can do as your auto attack. That is pretty damn freaking substantial, I'm going to say it. Pretty damn substantial when you consider it. It's not going to work on every enemy, but out of all the damage types, physical, fire, lightning, etc., necrotic is probably the most useful in the vast majority of situations. Again, It's ironic when you think about the aspect that it's actually the situations you might encounter dealing with like necromantic stuff that it might be less useful. Though not necessarily so, to be sure. But it is worth pointing out. But Emmrich, really good support damage dealer. If you want a comparison, think of Morgan back in Dragon Age Origins or Velana in Dragon Age Awakening. Like, I'd probably put like Velana. He's not a healer. He can heal. Everyone can heal. Or pretty much everyone can heal one way or another. But he does give you that kind of benefit with his skill. So that is really useful because one of the ways you do damage very well in this game is not just having abilities that themselves do a lot of damage. It's also being able to reduce enemy defenses so that damage is going through. And that is what Emmrich provides. Item-wise, the recruitment mission you have for this guy gives you tons of items for him or shortly thereafter. So that is a really good situation. Like, I'm sure many of the items, like at least the weapon and armor that I use for Emmrich, are things that I literally acquired when I recruited him. So, like in the recruitment mission, doing just some exploration. So that is a big point in Emmrich's favor. Like, the availability of items is pretty damn high for him. And then, story-wise, I admit I wasn't particularly fond of all of it because it's kind of spitting in the face of existing lore. But then again, Dragon Age the Veilguard does that consistently. That's a discussion for another time. But for what it is worth, there were certainly some interesting aspects about it. Like, Emmrich is dealing with the dead, and yet he's got panic attacks, thinking of dying. And the whole Lich thing, he can become a Lich and avoid death. But there's dilemmas on that subject. Regardless, great companion, good storyline. I'd say Harding's Titan reveal is the things you learn with Harding about the Titans and the implications there are better handled at the very least, like as opposed to the necromancy and all that kind of stuff. I wonder how the freaking Andraste and Danavar is supposed to be. How do they feel about their dead being raised and used as a workforce by the necropolis? Yeah, that is not particularly a great story point, but then again, that is Veilguard in a nutshell. For every good, there's tens of problems that arise from a story aspect. For what in isolation, however, it is a pretty good story as it is, or as much as it can be. And yeah, he's an interesting companion, interesting quest line, unique locations. Not necessarily the best unique locations though. Like, you do have like one area you go to twice to deal with his missions. Isn't the greatest area, it's also not the worst area, and at least it is a unique area, which is not something I can say necessarily for Davrin. I mean, each companion does have certain unique areas that they have access to, but it is one thing when you have a portion of the map that you'd go to anyway, seal off until you do a companion quest. Another thing when you go to a completely different area that you only go to for companion missions. That's one of the things that Emmrich provides. Then we have at number 4, Lucanis. Oh boy, do I feel bad about Lucanis. Let me make this point very clearly. When you recruit Lucanis, the recruitment mission and the story aspects, very compelling. Like, you go to a unique location, it's underwater, it's a prison underwater, awesome stuff. And it's like, oh, he's possessed by these demon. Like, there should be a lot of interesting story aspects. There aren't, I'm afraid to say. Like, Lucanis is probably the biggest letdown I have with this game. Maybe it's because Mary Kirby was basically fired from BioWare, or EA removed a lot of people from BioWare a while ago, or a certain number of people from BioWare a while ago, including Mary Kirby, who apparently wrote Lucanis. Maybe that's the reason behind it. Maybe there's other reasons behind it. But suffice to say, Lucanis starts out very strong and isn't so great in the long term. Like, oh, he's a guy possessed by a demon, so he should have a lot of interesting, dialogue and interesting discussions and dilemmas, etc. That never fucking happens. And yeah, so from a story perspective, he starts strong, and you have the hope that there's something going to be a lot interesting, but there isn't, unfortunately. Which is a shame because Lucanis is a freaking monster from a gameplay standpoint. Like, seriously, if his story was more interesting, I'd put him number 1. But it's not. You have an interesting location in terms of recruitment, but you don't have interesting companion quest locations. So that is a letdown with regards to him. You have easy access to items with him. A lot of them. You just gotta explore Treviso. Seriously, I got so many freaking weapons for Lucanis very, very quickly in the game. And upgrades for those weapons. You also get an easy access to a revival charge item. That's pretty damn strong. And armors and all that. Again, like, I think I was able to equip Lucanis the easiest out of all companions. That's pretty damn strong. Pretty damn useful. His Veilguard skill, at least the one I got, again, I don't know if there's any difference. I haven't checked on that. But critical damage is increased by 50%, detonation damage increases by 50%, and his abilities deal 25% more damage. Also, yeah, this revival charge, reducing the cooldown of his cooldowns by 50%, pretty damn freaking powerful. Here's the thing about Lucanis. He has a heal, but whatever, who cares, right? He's a damage dealer. If you're using Lucanis for healing, I think you're doing something very, very wrong. Unless you have literally no other option. Here's the thing. He applies Sundered and detonates Overwhelmed. And he's doing necrotic damage while you're at it. You don't have to necessarily just do necrotic damage, but that is the main thing. Lucanis and Emmrich are an incredibly powerful team just on their freaking own. Look, Emmrich just debuffing enemies and Lucanis shredding them. Like, this guy, when I want to kill something, I bring Lucanis. Like, he has got fast cooldowns and powerful cooldowns that do a truckload of damage on their own. I mean, of course, you always, when I say on their own, I'm obviously considering detonations inherently, but I'm not considering, like, having, say, Emmrich to give that extra necrotic damage that he can bring in combat. So Lucanis is really powerful from that capability. So, item-wise, easy access, damage dealing capability, very freaking high. At least with abilities. I think Hardening, just from a practical perspective, does more auto attack damage, range capability after all. But from an ability damage, easily the best. Like, in terms of pure burst damage, not necessarily sustained damage. Keep that aspect in mind. So yeah, Lucanis number 4. Number 5, Taash. Oh yes, Taash. Now, let's consider Taash for a bit. Their ability. In this case, oddly enough, I actually loaded a save without the Hero of the Veilguard status. But that's not really important, right? Just ignore that for a moment. But here's the thing about Taash. Taash applies detonates weakened, so that's pretty solid, right? And can do a good amount of fire damage. So damage versus health, damage versus burning, shockwave on impact. So Taash is going to do a significant amount of fire damage, can grant you invulnerability, can apply Overwhelmed if you so want it, and can do fire breathing if you so desire. I admit that I'm not sure on this. Like, with Rook's damage, that's a different discussion. With companion damage, I do prefer relying on detonations, or at the very least damage over time effect. I'm not really feeling Taash from a damage dealing perspective. But Taash does still have a taunt, easy access to items. So, like, auto attack damage can be pretty solid for Taash. And Taash can get a lot of items very, very quickly. Not necessarily as quickly as Lucanis, but certainly up there, regardless. Taash's taunt is not as good as Davrin's taunt, because yeah, you do still have the healing effect, but it's way over here, and you don't have an auto taunt when Rook is low, so that is a downside that you gotta concern yourself about. Like, it's more useful from a damage perspective, but not necessarily from a survival perspective. But easy access to damage, to items, pretty good auto attack damage. Those things are absolutely useful with respect to Taash. And look, it's not wrong necessarily to have a companion like I would focus more on the detonation with Taash, because detonation and burning damage. Like, Taash is great if you're focusing on burning damage, because that's what Taash is offering. A lot of freaking burning damage to enemies, regardless of the way you build Taash. And that's from a gameplay perspective. From an item perspective, as I said, easy. From a story perspective, I mean, I don't care about the binary stuff, non-binary stuff, one way or another. I couldn't care less. But I have to say, the lead writer of Veilguard wrote this character. And you can really see, like, Trickwicks has a tendency of having writer's pet characters, and certainly this is the case. I wouldn't say Taash is the best written companion, far from it. I think the dialogue and just how Qunari look in general in Veilguard is pretty crap. It's not just even a Taash thing, it's just like general the faces, the hair, and all that. To be fair, Taash probably does look the best out of all the Qunari in the game, but that's probably because Taash has a unique model. But still, it isn't freaking great what they did with the Qunari design. Like, I played the Qunari Inquisitor in Inquisition. It's an abomination, let's just put it like that. There are some interesting elements from a story perspective, even if you don't care at all about the non-binary stuff or you hate it, whatever your stance on that is. Point is, there are some really interesting aspects about the Qunari and Taash's storyline, as much as you can stomach that. Basically, Veilguard is a massive retcon of the series. In a lot of ways, people would call it a hard reboot, whatever. But yeah, there's a lot of problems with respect to that. But I gotta say, I know there's a lot of videos out there that, you know, people are making fun of the whole bloody thing. And I think, like, Dorian handled, like, inclusivity better. Like, Dorian's discussion with his dad, like, people are making that comparison. So I think that's handled better than Inquisition. I don't think it's handled very well here. But the Qunari stuff, good. And from a questline perspective, Taash does have unique areas they only access through their questline, including the middle of a freaking volcano that's also an Anton base, which is pretty awesome as an area. It's really hard to match. Like, Harding has some really cool dwarven stuff. Taash has some really cool areas as well, like Qunari base in a volcano. That is pretty freaking awesome. In the middle of an old Brave Warden base that was abandoned. Pretty awesome. Separate from the area that you recruit Taash in. Well, it's in the same map, but you only access it when you do Taash's questline. And it's not like, say, with Davrin, where it's like, oh, a small portion. It's a lot of the map. Basically, like, the Ravani map is like, just half of it is like Taash's recruitment area. The other freaking half of it is like Taash's quest lines, companion quest, the finale of it. And it's pretty good, what we do have in that area. I think, like, that is something worth saying. And look, let me say this much. Banter-wise, like, dialogue-wise, whatever you think about, like, the non-binary stuff, Taash does have quite a few interesting things to say. As I said, Weeks does love to have writer's pet, does have companions or characters that are very much their pets, you know, writer's pet. And that's the case with Taash. Like, there were quite a few interesting dialogues that I had with Taash. So I actually enjoyed, in a lot of times, having Taash in my party because they had a lot to say that was relevant. Not necessarily in all cases, but it was kind of hilarious, especially because Taash doesn't like the whole necromancy stuff. And you know what? I relate a lot to that. I found it fucking creepy in a lot of ways dealing with Emmrich. And it's like, I like the fact that Taash was also creeped out because it also was how I felt in a lot of ways. So maybe, you know, if you're creeped out by necromancy, which you bloody well should be if you're thinking hard on it, if you're trying to take it seriously as opposed to just some fun thing, as Emmrich does, then I think Taash enriches that experience. And that's kind of my point. Like, Taash is adding to the game. Not necessarily for their quest line, but with the Qunari aspect, with revealing certain things about the Qunari, is a good addition to the party. Next up, Neve. Look, I romance Neve. There's a lot of things I like about Neve. But she's also kind of mediocre in a lot of ways. There's no companion that's horrible. Well, there is one I'd probably consider. She's focused on freezing enemies, but companion damage is best used when you're either doing damage over time or when you're trying to do detonations. Neve is not really built around that. Yes, she can detonate Sunder, but sure shit doesn't compare to what other companions can do with Sundered. Oh, she can apply Weakened. There's better companions with that. She can freeze enemies. That's kind of... Her healing isn't great. Her damage isn't great. She's trying to be a support mage, but Emmrich is much better at that particular role. Especially when you consider how many enemies can resist frozen damage in the game. Not as much as, say, lightning damage. That can be a problem. Though, to be fair, only Bellara has lightning damage. And Rook, if you build on that. And you got to consider that with regards to how you build Rook. But... yeah, I just, like, Neve is trying to be everything, right? She's trying to disable enemies and have detonations and weakened effects, and it's like, it just kind of doesn't work out from my point of view. And, like, you can say, oh, but the frozen effect. Yeah, the frozen effect. How useful do you think the frozen effect is against really difficult bosses? Like, it can work. I didn't hate using Neve in my party. She can have a lot of things that are interesting to say. Item-wise, it actually took me a decent amount of time to actually find some decent items, like a weapon for Neve. But it's okay. But okay is not good enough, to be honest, compared to some others. She doesn't have the sheer survivability benefit of Davrin, or the damage Lucanis and Harding have, or the auto-attack burning damage that Taash has. And easy access to items and unique areas. And I think that's probably the worst aspect of Neve. As a character, dialogue-wise, conversation-wise, she's interesting to talk to. Banter-wise, she's interesting to listen to. But her freaking storyline is garbage tier. Like, seriously, I would much rather do every other companion storyline than do any quest in Neve's storyline again. And again, I like this character. I romanced her for a reason, but geez, that storyline is freaking awful. It's like you're doing the detective work. Let me tell you what detective work, and it's not even the quality necessarily of the story, it's the gameplay of that story. So, one of the problems that exists with Neve, the big problem, is every single quest she has is taking place in Menrafas. In a big hub area that you're gonna go to freaking dozens of times. Again, and again, and again, and again. And a lot of the stuff that Neve does is detective work. She's talking with people and it's so fucking dull as dirt. And even when you fight enemies, it's not interesting. Oh, look, I'm fighting more fucking Venatorian mercenaries. Oh, I'm going to the catacombs in Menrafas. Menrafas is a freaking horrible area in the game, easily the worst area in the game, and Neve's so centered around it. At least, you know, Lucanis may have some issues, but mercifully, his quests are relatively short compared to what we deal with freaking Neve. Maybe I should have blighted Menrafas. You do have that choice. Maybe that would have changed a lot of things with that dynamic. Maybe would have opened up Lucanis more, but the experience I got, I don't know if it's for certain, but it's much bigger than Treviso in a lot of ways, at least. And not necessarily just the areas, like the verticality of it. And geez, you go again and again and again, and you go back to areas you've gone to once or twice. Like, that is the really frustrating aspect with Neve. She's not a horrible character. In a lot of ways, she's well written, but geez, the actual moment-to-moment gameplay when dealing with her storyline is freaking awful. The only reason I'm not putting Neve at the bottom tier on this list is because she does have some uses in combat. She is interesting to talk to, and she doesn't make me feel like I want to throw her down a dark pit. In fact, she's actually quite very nice to talk to. Unlike freaking Bellara. Holy shit. If there is a companion I would remove from the fucking game, it would be Bellara, without a freaking doubt. Okay. Let me talk about Bellara. The only thing she's got going for her in terms of usefulness, and don't get me wrong, she is exceptionally useful in that respect. Yeah, she applies weakened. There's better people with that, and weakened is the worst of the detonations anyway. She can detonate sundered. There's better companions with respect to that, so just pointing that out. Besides, Bellara has the best healing in the game. Not from an actual healing perspective, hardening wins that aspect, but she does have one particular quirk. She does get two quirks. She does have a heal that triggers automatically if you're low HP, okay, if it's not on cooldown, and she restores 20% of your ultimate whenever you heal. And you can get this skill pretty damn early once you get Bellara, and you get Bellara very quickly in the game. So from a gameplay standpoint, yes, she's not going to do the damage or support role as others from a damage dealing perspective, but she is going to give you a lot of ultimate abilities, far more so than others. And ultimates can wipe out entire groups of enemies, especially at lower levels. But even at higher levels, they're useful. Personally, at higher like once I was at the end game, I just kind of, like, early on when I was encountering some difficult bosses, I always used Bellara. But here's the thing. That is useful. Item-wise, I struggled for a very fucking long time to find a good weapon for her. And I couldn't. Like, I don't know where the hell it is. I don't know. Regardless. Here's the thing. Here's the thing about Bellara. She is awful story-wise in every single way. Like, there's some interesting elven stuff that she's revealing, but geez, I detest discussing things with Bellara. Do you know what Bellara is? She's the PB of Dragon Age Veilguard. You know how PB was an annoying piece of shit? Bellara is worse in a lot of freaking ways. It's like her entire, like, and don't be moved by how she looks over here with this item, because believe me when I say this much about Bellara, her default look is not fucking great. Like, she actually looks much better. Like, this is her default look. She doesn't look good. Her armor doesn't look good. Her items don't look good. Like, just the entire character design. The dialogue is freaking cringe as shit. The voice acting, and I'm not talking about the voice actress themselves. I'm talking about the actual direction of it is freaking awful. She's worse than Sarah. I wanted to throw Sarah down a deep dark well, but at least with Sarah I could just laugh at some of the idiotic shit that Sarah was saying. I can't even do that with Bellara because we're meant to take her serious, the shit she's saying seriously, and man is it cringe as shit. And that is the problem I have with Bellara. Very useful from a gameplay standpoint, exceptionally so from the ability of charging the ultimate. Can help you out in other ways, but it is situational. Like other companions, you know, with Davrin, you can either focus on detonating weakened or taunting enemies, for instance, or applying overwhelmed. Like other companions have their own playstyles, right? Like you can focus on different things. And maybe Neve is to focus on trying to do too many things at once. But with Bellara, she's really good at one thing, not so great at doing anything else. And she does that one thing so well that you don't want to do anything else. But it is exceptionally powerful. But she is really, really annoying. Like, I used every companion quite a bit in this game. I, switched between Davrin, Emmrich, Harding, Lucanis, Neve, and Taash quite often. I used Bellara the least, and I had to force myself to use it. Not because she's not good gameplay-wise, she is, but she's so awful to interact with, to listen to hear commentary about, to hear commentary from. BioWare, I understand they want to make, that every game has had this character that's, awkward and really weird socially and, just weird, but you did it better. Alistair, yeah. I think it was deeply insulting to Alistair to compare freaking Alistair to Bellara. Or Liliana, maybe? Jeez, I don't want to think about that comparison because Liliana and Alistair are far more interesting characters. Like, the dog in Dragon Age Origins is a far better freaking character. Take any companion you've ever had, or squad member you've ever had in any BioWare game, with the exception of Jacob, they're better characters than Bellara. Flat out. So, perfectly viable from a gameplay standpoint, really fucking awful from a story standpoint. Costin, signing out.